The Christmas tree lights blurred through my tears as I read my father's text message again. "Don't come tomorrow. You're not welcome here." I stared at my phone in disbelief. The same phone I'd used 3 weeks earlier to transfer my entire life savings to save their house from foreclosure. That night, sitting alone among half-wrapped presents meant for a family who had just disowned me, I made a phone call that would uncover decades of lies, expose a $160,000 theft, and ultimately bring the house of cards my parents had built crashing down around them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The snow was falling gently outside my apartment window in Boston when my phone buzzed with a text. December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas. I was wrapping presents, a cashmere scarf for Mom, a vintage watch for Dad, and special gifts for my younger brothers, Tyler and Sam. I glanced at my phone, expecting it to be my boyfriend David confirming our plans to drive to my parents' house in Vermont. Instead, I saw my father's name. Strange. Dad never texted. He always called. "Natalie, your mother and I have been talking. We think it's best if you skip Christmas this year. Things are tense since your comments at Thanksgiving, and we need space. Don't bother coming tomorrow." I read the message 3 times, then called him immediately. "Dad, what's going on? What do you mean I shouldn't come for Christmas?" His voice was uncharacteristically cold. "You heard your mother at Thanksgiving. You embarrassed us in front of the entire family with your suggestions." My suggestions had been nothing more than gently bringing up that perhaps they should consider downsizing from their 4-bedroom house now that all of us kids had moved out, especially given their financial struggles. "Dad, I just helped you. Pay $15,000 toward your mortgage 3 weeks ago. I emptied my savings account for that." There was a pause. "Nobody asked you to do that, Natalie. That was your choice." My mind flashed back to the desperate late-night call I'd received from my mother in November, the tears in her voice as she explained they were 3 months behind on payments. The bank is threatening foreclosure, how they didn't know where to turn. "Mom literally called me crying, begging for help," I reminded him. "Your mother gets emotional sometimes. We would have figured something out." His voice was dismissive, as if my mother's tears had been a minor inconvenience. "So I give you my entire savings and now I'm banned from Christmas. What about Tyler and Sam? Are they still coming?" "Of course they are. They're family." The emphasis on "there" hit me like a slap. "And I'm not?" My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay calm. "Natalie, you've always been different, always questioning our decisions, always pushing your ideas about how we should live. Your brothers understand family loyalty." Family loyalty. The phrase that had been weaponized against me my entire life whenever I questioned anything. Tyler and Sam never questioned, never challenged, and were therefore the good sons. I hung up and stared at the half-wrapped presents on my coffee table. The cashmere scarf I'd spent weeks finding in just the right shade of blue to match my mother's eyes. The vintage watch that reminded me of the one my grandfather had given my father, which he'd sold years ago to make ends meet. I texted my brothers, wondering if they knew. Sam responded immediately. "Yeah, Dad mentioned something about it. Sorry, sis. Maybe give them some space. Things have been weird since Thanksgiving." Tyler, the oldest, didn't respond until hours later. "Not my decision, Nat. You know how Mom and Dad get. We'll catch up in the new year." Neither asked why I wasn't coming. Neither seemed surprised. Neither offered to stand up for me. I called David, who was appalled. "After everything you've done for them? That's insane, Natalie." They said I embarrassed them at Thanksgiving by suggesting they consider a smaller house instead of draining their retirement and borrowing money from their children. That's just common sense. He was right. But in my family, questioning my parents' decisions, no matter how financially disastrous, was considered a betrayal. I spent that night looking through old family photos. There I was at 10 years old, proudly holding up my straight-A report card. My father's arm was around Tyler, who had just made the football team despite his C average. There I was, at high school graduation, valedictorian, standing awkwardly while my parents beamed at Sam, who had just been accepted to the same college they'd both attended, despite my full scholarship to MIT. My academic achievements had always been acknowledged with quick nods, while my brother's athletic prowess and social popularity had been celebrated exuberantly. I'd always told myself it didn't matter, that I was simply different. But as I sat there, Christmas presents half-wrapped and suddenly without purpose, something hardened in me. This wasn't just about Christmas. This was about a pattern that had existed my entire life. I opened my laptop and began to dig. I had always been the organized one, the one who kept records of everything, just in case. My brothers teased me for it and called me paranoid. But years of being the family afterthought had taught me to protect myself. I pulled up a spreadsheet I'd started 3 years ago when I first began helping my parents financially. Every transfer, every loan, every gift carefully documented. Not because I expected repayment, but because something in me always knew this day would come. The total made me sick. $42,180 over 3 years. My first bonus after my promotion. The inheritance from my grandmother that was supposed to be my house down payment. The money I'd saved for the future I hoped to build with David. All of it is gone. All of it seemingly meaningless to the people who had raised me. I was about to close my laptop when a new email notification appeared. It was from the mortgage company I'd made the payment to for my parents. The subject line made my blood run cold. Confirmation of change of payment allocation as requested. I opened it with growing dread. The email confirmed that, as requested by the account holders, the $15,000 payment I had made toward their mortgage had been reallocated per their instructions. Only $5,000 had gone to the mortgage. The rest had been withdrawn as a cashier's check. $10,000 gone. Not to save their house, but for... What? I called the mortgage company first thing the next morning. After verifying my identity as the originator of the payment, the representative confirmed what had happened. Yes, Ms. Caldwell, the primary account holders requested the reallocation on December 1st. They provided the verification information and stated that you had authorized this change. I absolutely did not, I said, my voice shaking. That money was specifically to prevent foreclosure. I understand, ma'am, but the account is in their name. Once you made the payment to their account, they had control over the funds. I do see here that the remaining $5,000 was applied to the past due balance, which brought the account current. So they'd used just enough to stop the immediate foreclosure threat and pocketed the rest. 3 weeks during which they'd called me several times, acting as if everything was normal. I remembered my mother mentioning that Tyler needed help with rent after losing his job. And Sam had posted pictures of a new car on Instagram just last week, despite complaining about student loan payments whenever I spoke to him. Had my financial rescue turned into a family slush fund, one that excluded me? That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I picked up my phone and called a number I'd had for years, but never used. "Hello, Richard Carter's office," said a crisp, professional voice. "This is Natalie Caldwell. I'd like to speak with Mr. Carter, please. It's about my parents, James and Margaret Caldwell." Richard Carter was my parents' attorney, or at least he had been when I was growing up. I hadn't heard his name mentioned in years, but I had kept his contact information in my address book. Some part of me had always known I might need it. One day, "Ms. Caldwell? Natalie? It's been quite some time," Richard said when he came on the line. His voice had aged, but still carried the same measured tone I remembered from childhood visits to his office. "What can I do for you?" "I need to know if you're still my parents' attorney," I said. There was a brief pause. "I haven't represented your parents in, about 8 years now. We had a professional disagreement." "About what?" I'm afraid I can't discuss that, even with their daughter. Attorney-client privilege. I took a deep breath. What if I told you they just diverted $10,000 of my money that was meant to save their house from foreclosure? Would that change things? Another pause, longer this time. That's concerning, but still not something I can comment on. However, Natalie, why don't you come by my office tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock. There might be some matters that, while I can't discuss my former work with your parents, could be relevant to your situation. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. I'm aware. I'll be in the office catching up on paperwork. No celebrations for me this year. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone, half expecting my father to call and apologize, or for one of my brothers to reach out. Instead, I got a text from my mother just after midnight. I hope you understand this is for the best. We'll call you after the holidays. No explanation, no acknowledgement of the money. Just a dismissal, as if I were a distant acquaintance whose feelings barely registered. David came over when I didn't respond to his earlier messages. He sat beside me as I showed him the email from the mortgage company, the texts from my family, the spreadsheet documenting years of financial support. Natalie, this is financial abuse, he said finally. You know that, right? I'd never thought of it that way. In my mind, I was just helping the family, doing what a good daughter should do. But seeing it through David's eyes made everything clearer. The pattern wasn't just unfair. It was systematic exploitation. The next morning, it dawned gray and cold. I headed to Richard Carter's office in downtown Boston. His office building was nearly empty, the security guard in the lobby barely glancing at me as I signed in. Richard's suite on the 12th floor was dark except for the light coming from his personal office at the end of the hallway. Natalie, he greeted me, standing to shake my hand. He had aged considerably, his once dark hair now white, his face lined with wrinkles, but his handshake was firm, his gaze direct. Please, sit down. Before we begin, Richard said, I need to make it clear that I cannot and will not violate attorney-client privilege, even for former clients. I understand. Good. He leaned back in his chair. Now, tell me exactly what happened with this $15,000. I explained everything. The late-night call from my mother about the foreclosure, my immediate transfer of funds, the subsequent discovery that only a third of the money had actually gone toward the mortgage. Richard listened without interruption, his expression grave. When I finished, he nodded slowly. And you said you've been keeping records of all financial assistance you've provided? Yes. Over $42,000 in the past 3 years. Smart. He stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of his office. Your parents were my clients from 1985 until 2017. As I mentioned, we had a disagreement that led to the end of our professional relationship. He pulled out a thick folder and returned to his desk. This is my personal copy of some documents related to your grandmother's estate, your father's mother, Eleanor Caldwell. My grandmother died when I was in college. I remembered the funeral, of course, but very little about the aftermath. I'd been in the middle of exams, and my parents had handled everything. What about it? Richard opened the folder and selected a document. This is a matter of public record, so I can discuss it with you. Your grandmother's will left her estate to be divided equally among her 3 grandchildren, you, Tyler, and Sam. I blinked in surprise. I only received $12,000. My parents said it was my third of her savings account. Richard's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. Eleanor Caldwell's estate was valued at approximately $480,000, including her house, investments, and savings. My mind raced, doing the math. So each of us should have received about $160,000? Correct. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I sat back in my chair, stunned. My parents stole my inheritance. Richard held up a hand. I didn't say that. But as the executor of Eleanor's will, your father had a fiduciary duty to distribute the assets according to her wishes. Did my brothers get their full shares? I cannot comment on that. But his expression told me everything. Tyler's new truck the summer after Grandma died. Sam's semester abroad in his junior year. Expenses my parents could never have afforded on their own. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I've been waiting for one of you grandchildren to come asking questions. Richard closed the folder. Your grandmother was my client before your parents were. She was very specific about her wishes. Is there anything I can do about it now? It's been 7 years. Richard leaned forward. The statute of limitations for breach of fiduciary duty in Massachusetts is typically 3 years from discovery of the breach. Not from when it occurred, from when it was discovered. Which would be today. Hypothetically speaking, yes. He handed me a business card. This is Jennifer Mack. She specializes in estate litigation. If you were considering exploring your options, she would be the person to speak with. I nodded, then remembered something else. My parents have been asking me to co-sign a refinancing application for their house. They said it was just a formality because of my excellent credit. For the first time, Richard's professional demeanor cracked slightly. He shook his head, a flash of genuine dismay, crossing his features. Natalie, if you had consigned that refinancing, you would have been legally responsible for the mortgage if they defaulted, which, given what you've told me, seems likely. They were setting me up, I said quietly. Richard didn't confirm or deny. He didn't need to. We both knew. What should I do? I asked, feeling more lost than ever. That depends on what you want, Richard replied. Do you want financial restitution, legal accountability, or simply to protect yourself going forward? I honestly didn't know. A part of me wanted justice, to reclaim what should have been mine. Another part just wanted to walk away, to cut all ties and begin healing. Richard pulled another document from the folder. Your grandmother left a letter to be given to each grandchild, along with their inheritance. I have copies because I helped her draft them. He handed me an envelope, yellowed with age, with my name written in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. My parents never gave me this, I said, a lump forming in my throat. No, Richard said quietly. They didn't. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. The paper inside was fragile, the ink slightly faded, but my grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable. The elegant, flowing script that had adorned birthday cards throughout my childhood. Dear Natalie, it began. If you're reading this, I've passed on, and you're receiving your inheritance as I intended. I've always seen something special in you, a thoughtfulness, an integrity that reminds me so much of your grandfather. Your mind works differently than the rest of the family, and that's your greatest strength, though they may never understand it. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. I've divided my estate equally among you and your brothers because I believe in fairness. But I've watched how your parents treat you differently, always expecting more while giving less. They did the same with your father compared to his brother, and I regret not speaking up then. The money I'm leaving you isn't just financial security, it's freedom. Freedom to make choices based on what you want, not what others demand of you. Freedom to create boundaries. Freedom to walk away if necessary. Trust yourself, Natalie. You see things clearly, even when others try to cloud your vision. Remember that you don't owe anyone your peace of mind, not even family, especially not family. The letter ended with, "All my love, Grandma Eleanor," followed by a postscript. P.S. If for any reason you don't receive what I've intended for you, go to Richard. He has copies of everything. I looked up at Richard, my vision still blurry with tears. She knew, I said softly. She knew they might try to keep it from me. Richard nodded. Your grandmother was a perceptive woman. She understood family dynamics better than most. I carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. What now? That's entirely up to you, Richard said. But I'd recommend you speak with Jennifer soon. The holidays will delay things, but you should at least get the process started. I thanked him and left, my mind swirling with anger, betrayal, and a strange sense of validation. Grandma had seen it too. I wasn't imagining the pattern of treatment I'd endured my entire life. As I drove home through Boston's empty streets, Christmas decorations seemed to mock me from every window. Families together, celebrating, while I had been cast aside, not just today but systematically, for years. I called Jennifer Mack's office, not expecting anyone to answer on Christmas Eve. To my surprise, she picked up. I'm just finishing some paperwork before the holiday, she explained. Richard called ahead to tell me about your situation. Can you come in on the 26th? I agreed, feeling a growing resolve strengthening my spine. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about standing up for myself, finally. When I got home, I made a decision. I called my parents' house, knowing the whole family would be there. My mother answered, her voice tight with false cheer. Natalie, Merry Christmas Eve. I was just thinking of calling you tomorrow. Put me on speakerphone, I said. I want everyone to hear this. What? Natalie, now isn't... Put me on speakerphone, Mom, unless you'd prefer I drive over and say this in person. A pause, then a click, and the background noise of the house filled my ear. Christmas music, voices, laughter that abruptly quieted. You're on speaker, my father said gruffly. What's so important it couldn't wait until after the holidays? I met with Richard Carter this morning, I said, my voice steady. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. I know about Grandma's will, I continued. I know I should have received $160,000, not $12,000. I know Dad breached his fiduciary duty as executor, and I know the statute of limitations starts from the date of discovery, which is today. My mother's voice suddenly shrill. Natalie, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that the $10,000 you diverted from my mortgage payment was just the latest in a pattern going back years. I understand that you were trying to get me to co-sign your refinance to make me legally responsible for your debts. Sweetheart, my father began, his voice unnaturally calm. Family matters should be discussed privately, not... Are Tyler and Sam there? I interrupted. A brief silence, then Sam's hesitant voice. Yeah, Nat, we're here. Did you get your full inheritance from Grandma? More silence. Then Tyler, defensive. What does it matter now? It was years ago. It matters because Mom and Dad stole from me to favor you, I said. Did you know? Did you know I only got a fraction of what Grandma intended? We didn't know the exact numbers, Sam admitted quietly. But we knew there was more than what they said at first, and you said nothing. It wasn't our place, Tyler argued. Dad said it was for your own good, that you'd just wasted on education and investing instead of enjoying life. I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. Right, better to give it to you for trucks and parties. Very responsible. Natalie, my mother cut in, we've always wanted what's best for all our children. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions. Save it, I said. I'm meeting with an estate litigation attorney on the 26th. You have until then to transfer the remaining $148,000 of my inheritance, plus interest for 7 years, into my account. Otherwise, I'll be filing a lawsuit that will expose everything. My father's voice dropped dangerously low. You would sue your own parents? Over Christmas? You banned your own daughter from Christmas after she saved your house, I countered. And yes, I absolutely would sue you. The documentation is clear, and Richard has copies of everything. You'll lose. "This will destroy this family," my mother said, her voice breaking. "You already did that," I replied. "I'm just refusing to keep paying for the damage." I hung up, my heart pounding but my mind clearer than it had been in years. 10 minutes later, my phone rang, Tyler calling. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Nat," he said, his voice oddly subdued. "I didn't know. I mean, I knew there was more money than they initially said, but I didn't know they gave you so little. That's messed up." "And the co-signing thing," Sam added. "Apparently I was on speaker on their end, too." "That's seriously shady. We had no idea." "Would it have mattered if you did?" I asked. A pause. "I'd like to think so," Tyler said finally. "Listen, we're coming over. Now. We need to talk, the three of us, without Mom and Dad." My brothers arrived 40 minutes later, looking uncomfortable and out of place in my apartment. Tyler, always the confident one, seemed deflated. Sam kept fiddling with his watch, the new Rolex I'd noticed in his Instagram posts last month. "How did you find out about all this?" Tyler asked as they settled onto my couch. "About Grandma's will, I mean." "Richard Carter still had the records," I said. "He stopped representing Mom and Dad 8 years ago because of what Dad did with the inheritance. He's been waiting for one of us to ask questions." Sam looked down at his hands. "I remember when I got my check. It was way more than I expected. $150,000. Dad said Grandma had made smart investments, but he never mentioned equal shares or that. The total estate was worth $480,000. I got about the same," Tyler admitted. "I bought my truck, invested some, spent the rest on travel and the down payment for my house. I had no idea you only got $12,000, Natalie. That's not right." "Did they tell you I got less?" I asked. The brothers exchanged glances. "Dad said you chose to take a smaller portion," Sam said finally. "He said you wanted some family heirloom instead of cash, Grandma's jewelry collection or something." I laughed bitterly. "I got a few old brooches and a dented locket, worth maybe $500 total." "Jesus," Tyler muttered. "But why would they do that?" "Because I was the only one who didn't need guidance with money," I said. "That's what Dad always said, right? That I was too responsible, too cautious with money. Meanwhile, they've been using me as their personal bank for years. I showed them my spreadsheet detailing the loans, the gifts, the transfers, money that had mysteriously always flowed one way." "What about the co-signing thing?" Sam asked. "Were they really trying to stick you with their mortgage?" "According to Richard, yes. If I'd co-signed that refinance application, I would have been legally responsible when they inevitably defaulted." Tyler shook his head. "I don't get it. Why would they target you like this? You're the one who's always helped them." "That's exactly why," I said. "I'm reliable. I'm responsible. I don't question them. Or at least I didn't until Thanksgiving. I was the perfect mark." Sam leaned forward. "What happened at Thanksgiving?" "All I remember is you suggesting they might want to downsize since the house is too big for them now." Mom started crying, saying I was trying to take her home. Dad accused me of not understanding family commitment. It was a whole scene after you guys left. The three of us sat in silence for a few moments, processing. "What are you going to do now?" Tyler finally asked. "Are you really going to sue them?" "I don't want to," I admitted. "But I'm not backing down either. They stole my inheritance, tried to saddle me with their debt, and then had the audacity to ban me from Christmas after I gave them $15,000. What if they pay you back?" Sam suggested. "The inheritance, the money they diverted from the mortgage payment. All of it." "It's not just about the money," I said. "It's about respect. It's about them finally seeing me as an equal member of this family, not just a resource to be exploited." Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he said slowly, I always wondered why they treated you differently. Why do they push me and Sam to pursue sports and popularity, while they push you toward academics and responsibility? It's like they were grooming you to be the responsible one they could rely on, and grooming us to be the fun ones who needed help, Sam added softly. That's pretty messed up when you think about it. So what happens now? Tyler asked. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the snow fall. That depends on Mom and Dad. If they want to make this right, they can. If not, would you really go through with a lawsuit? Sam pressed. I turned to face my brothers. Absolutely. I'm done being the family doormat. Tyler nodded slowly. You know, if it comes to that, we'll back you up. Right, Sam? Sam looked startled, but then nodded firmly. Yeah, this isn't right. And if they did this to you, who knows what else they've been hiding? For the first time in years, I felt something shift between us. A leveling of the playing field. We weren't the golden sons and the useful daughter anymore. We were three adults confronting the uncomfortable truth about our parents. There's something else you should know, I said, pulling out Grandma's letter. She left this for me. According to Richard, she left similar letters for each of you. We never got any letters, Tyler said, frowning. Because they never gave them to you, I replied, handing them the yellowed paper. Read it. It explains a lot. They huddled together on the couch, reading Grandma's words. When they finished, Sam looked up, his face pale. She knew, he said softly. She knew exactly what they were like. And she tried to protect us, Tyler added. All of us, not just Natalie. By making sure we each had the means to be independent, I said. Except they didn't let that happen for me. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from my father. We need to talk. Come to the house tomorrow, 10 a.m. I showed it to my brothers. What do you think? Should I go? Tyler and Sam exchanged glances. Not alone, Tyler said finally. We're coming with you. All three of us, Sam affirmed. It's time we had some honest conversation in this family. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not that everything would magically be fixed, but that perhaps I wasn't completely alone in this fight. Okay, I agreed. But I'm not backing down. They need to make this right. And if they don't? Sam asked quietly. Then I follow through with the lawsuit, I said firmly, and I finally stopped trying to earn the approval of people who were never going to give it. Tyler nodded solemnly. Whatever happens tomorrow, things will never be the same. On that, we all agreed. Whatever happened next, the comfortable lies that had structured our family for decades had been stripped away. There was no going back to how things were before, and maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. Christmas morning dawned with a heavy blanket of snow covering Boston. I woke early after a restless night, my mind racing with questions and scenarios for the upcoming confrontation. David had called the night before, concerned after not hearing from me all day. I'm spending Christmas morning with my brothers, I told him, the words feeling strange on my tongue. Then we're going to my parents' house together. Do you want me to come with you? He asked. I considered it briefly, but shook my head even though he couldn't see me. No, this needs to be just family, but thank you for offering. Family. The word had taken on a new meaning in the past 24 hours. Was it the people who shared your DNA but treated you like an ATM? Or was it the people who stood by you when the truth came out, regardless of blood ties? Tyler and Sam arrived, at 8:30 a.m., both looking as sleep-deprived as I felt. We sat in my kitchen, nursing coffee and planning our approach. We need to stay united, Tyler said, the big brother instinct I rarely saw directed toward me finally showing itself. No matter what they say or how they try to divide us. They'll try to isolate you, Nat, Sam added. That's their pattern. Make you the problem, the unreasonable one. I nodded, appreciating their insight. What about the money? Do you think they'll agree to pay it back? Tyler sighed. I honestly don't know. They'd have to sell the house to come up with that kind of cash. And that house is Mom's identity. The house they can barely afford, I reminded him. The house. They almost lost to foreclosure last month until I gave them $15,000. About that, Sam said hesitantly. I saw Mom shopping yesterday. New clothes, expensive stuff. I thought it was strange given their financial situation, but now you're wondering if she spent my money, I finished for him. He nodded, looking ashamed. We arrived at our parents' house precisely at 10 a.m. The Christmas wreath on the door, the lights twinkling from the windows, the smoke rising from the chimney. It all seemed like a cruel facade given what we now knew. Dad opened the door, his face tightening when he saw all three of us. I asked to speak with Natalie, he said stiffly. We're here to support our sister, Tyler said, stepping forward. This concerns all of us. Dad hesitated, then grudgingly opened the door wider. Your mother's in the living room. Mom was sitting, ramrod straight on the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The Christmas tree beside her was laden with presents, none of which, I noted, had my name on them. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasting turkey, the traditional family. Dinner I'd now been excluded from? Natalie, she began, her voice brittle. I see you've brought reinforcements. We're here as a family, Sam said, taking a seat beside me on the love seat opposite our parents. Tyler remained standing, arms crossed. Fine, Dad said, his jaw clenched. Let's get this over with. Natalie, your accusations yesterday were completely out of line. Your grandmother's will was complex, and as executor, I had to make certain decisions. Decisions that happened to benefit everyone but me? I interrupted. We gave you what we thought was appropriate, Mom said. You were always the responsible one, the one with the good job and the financial sense. Your brothers needed more guidance, Tyler scoffed. That's your explanation? You stole from Natalie because she's responsible? We didn't steal anything, Dad snapped. We redistributed the assets in a way that made sense for the family. Against Grandma's explicit wishes, I said. I read her letter, Dad, the one you never gave me. Mom's face paled. Richard had every right, I cut in. He was Grandma's attorney before he was yours. He kept copies of everything because he knew what kind of people you are. And what kind of people are we exactly? Dad's voice was dangerously low. The kind who takes $148,000 from their daughter, and then bans her from Christmas when she suggests you might want to downsize from a house you can't afford, I said evenly. The kind who divert $10,000 from a mortgage payment given in good faith, Tyler added. The kind who try to trap their daughter into being legally responsible for their debt, Sam finished. Our united front clearly rattled them. Mom's eyes darted between her sons, as if unable to comprehend their betrayal. Dad's face had turned an alarming shade of red. We've made sacrifices for all of you, he said. Paid for your educations, your extracurriculars, given you every advantage. Except, Natalie paid for her own education with scholarships, Tyler pointed out. And she's been supporting you financially for years according to her records. Those records, Mom said dismissively. Always keeping score, always counting every penny. That's your problem, Natalie. You've never understood the give and take of family. Give and take? I repeated incredulously. I've given over $42,000 in the past 3 years alone. What exactly have you taken from your retirement fund to help me? The silence that followed was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, I said, leaning forward. You're going to return my inheritance, with interest. You're going to repay the $10,000 you diverted from the mortgage payment. And you're going to apologize, not just to me, but to Grandma, whose wishes you deliberately ignored. Dad laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the quiet room. Or what? You'll sue us? Drag the family name through court? Be the daughter who took her parents to court over Christmas? Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what I'll do. We don't have that kind of money, Mom protested. Not without selling the house. Then sell the house, I replied. It's too big for you anyway, just like I said at Thanksgiving. This is ridiculous, Dad muttered. Tyler, Sam, you can't possibly support this. She's trying to make your parents homeless for Christmas. I watched my brothers holding my breath. This was the moment of truth. Would they stand with me or fold under our parents' manipulation as they always had? Tyler straightened his shoulders. Actually, Dad, we do support her. What you did was wrong, and you know it. Pay Natalie what? You owe her. Or we'll all be testifying on her behalf in court. Mom burst into tears, the kind of dramatic sobs I'd seen whenever she wasn't getting her way. How can you all turn on us like this? After everything we've done for you. You mean, after everything Natalie has done for you, Sam corrected. We've seen her spreadsheets, Mom. We know about all the loans that were never repaid, all the financial emergencies she bailed you out of. Dad stood abruptly. I think you should all leave. We're not discussing this further today. It's Christmas, for God's sake. Funny how you remember it's Christmas now, I said, rising to my feet. But fine, we'll go. You have until January 2nd to transfer the money. After that, I'm filing suit. The three of us walked silently to our cars, the Christmas morning air, crisp and biting against our faces. None of us spoke until we reached the driveway. That went about as well as expected, Tyler said, breaking the tension. Sam kicked at the snow with his boot. Did you see Mom's new bracelet? That wasn't costume jewelry. I hadn't noticed, but now that Sam mentioned it, I recalled the glint of diamonds on my mother's wrist. The $10,000 mystery solved, I said dryly. What now? Tyler asked, leaning against his car. Now we wait, I replied. Either they pay what they owe, or I follow through with the lawsuit. My brothers nodded, but I could see the conflict in their eyes. Standing against our parents was new territory for them. For me, it felt like the culmination of years of silent rebellion. Christmas dinner at my place? I offered impulsively. Nothing fancy, but I have a frozen lasagna and some wine. To my surprise, they both accepted. As we drove back to my apartment in separate cars, I realized this might be the first honest Christmas our fragmented family had ever experienced. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. My parents didn't call or text. Neither did my brothers, though I suspected they were processing everything in their own way. I met with Jennifer Mack on the 26th, laying out my case with all the documentation Richard had provided. This is remarkably clear-cut, she said, reviewing the paperwork. Your grandmother's will explicitly stated equal distribution. Your father had fiduciary duty as executor, and you have proof of receiving only a fraction of your entitled share. And the statute of limitations? I asked anxiously. Starts from discovery, which was Christmas Eve. You're well within the time frame. She looked up at me, her expression serious. But I should warn you, family lawsuits are emotionally brutal. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it. I've been emotionally abused by my family for years. How much worse could this be? Jennifer nodded sympathetically. Fair point. Still, think carefully. Sometimes the threat of a lawsuit is more effective than actually filing. I've given them until January 2nd, I told her. If they haven't transferred the money by then, we proceed. I'll start preparing the paperwork, she agreed. New Year's Eve arrived without any word from my parents. David had insisted on taking me out to dinner, wanting to distract me from the family drama that had consumed my holiday season. You look beautiful, he said as we sat in a cozy Italian restaurant downtown. And more relaxed than I expected, given everything. I smiled, realizing he was right. There was a strange lightness in my chest, a burden lifted. I think it's because I'm finally standing up for myself. No more pretending, no more accepting their version of reality. To your new beginning, he said, raising his glass. We clinked glasses, and I felt a surge of gratitude for this man who had stood by me through all of this without judgment. "Have you heard anything from your brothers?" he asked after we'd ordered. "Not directly," I admitted. "But Tyler's wife called yesterday. Apparently my parents have been calling everyone in the family, telling their side of the story. Which is that I'm mentally unstable, that I'm making wild accusations because I've always been jealous of my brothers, that I'm trying to force them to sell their home out of spite." David shook his head in disgust. "Classic gaslighting. The funny thing is, it's not working. Tyler's wife actually called to say she's seen how they treat me over the years and never understood why I put up with it. Several cousins have reached out with similar messages of support. People see more than we realize," David said softly. As we were finishing dessert, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Sam. "Dad just told us they're listing the house tomorrow. Mom's furious, but he says they don't have a choice." A mixture of emotions washed over me. Vindication, sadness, relief. I showed David the text. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked carefully. I considered the question. What I wanted was acknowledgement, recognition of what they did. An apology would have been nice. The money is important, but it's more about the principle at this point. "Do you think they understand that?" "I think they understand they're cornered," I replied honestly. "But real understanding? No, I don't think they're capable of that." When I got home that night, there was an email waiting from my father. The subject line simply read, "Resolution." "Natalie," it began. "Your mother and I have listed the house with a realtor. Given the market and the improvements we've made, we expect to clear enough to repay your inheritance and the diverted mortgage funds. The closing will likely take 60-90 days. In the meantime, we've arranged for a bank transfer of $10,000 to your account as a show of good faith. The remaining funds will follow upon the sale of the house. We request that you do not file your lawsuit while this process is underway. Your mother is heartbroken over this entire situation, and the public embarrassment of a lawsuit would be devastating to her health. I hope this demonstrates our commitment to resolving this matter amicably. Dad." No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a businesslike letter addressing a transaction. I forwarded the email to Jennifer, asking for her advice. She responded almost immediately. "Get everything in writing, properly executed by an attorney. Don't agree to delay filing unless they sign a formal agreement acknowledging the debt and the repayment plan." I drafted my response to my father with care. "Dad, I appreciate your willingness to address the financial aspects of this situation. However, I need more than verbal assurances. Please have your attorney draft a formal agreement acknowledging the debt and outlining the repayment plan, including interest accumulated over the past 7 years. Once this agreement is properly executed, I will consider delaying filing. Until then, the January 2nd deadline stands. Natalie." I hit send, feeling oddly calm. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking approval or afraid of rocking the boat. I was a woman standing my ground, demanding what was rightfully mine. The next morning, New Year's Day, I woke to my phone ringing. It was Tyler. "Have you checked your email?" he asked without preamble. "Not yet," I said, glancing at the clock. It was barely 7 a.m. Dad sent all 3 of us something an hour ago. You need to see it. I scrambled to open my laptop, finding the email from my father in my inbox. The subject line read, "Family Meeting, January 5th. "My children," it began. "Your mother and I request your presence at the house on January 5th at 2 p.m. We have important family matters to discuss regarding recent events and future arrangements. Attendance is not optional. I have also invited Richard Carter to attend, in a professional capacity." "Dad." "What do you think?" Tyler asked, still on the phone. "I think they've realized they have no choice," I replied, scanning the email again. "But I'm not sure why they want Richard there. Protection, maybe? A neutral witness? Maybe, I agreed, though something about it nagged at me. Are you and Sam going? Yeah, we'll be there. Safety in numbers, right? I smiled at that. Right. I'll see you both on the 5th. As I hung up, I felt a mixture of trepidation and resolve. Whatever my parents were planning, I wouldn't be facing it alone. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had allies in my brothers. Whatever came next, that alone was a victory, worth celebrating. January 5th arrived cloudy and cold, with a light snow falling as I drove to my parents' house. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind cycling through possible scenarios for this family meeting. I'd consulted with Jennifer, who had advised me to record the conversation if legally possible in Massachusetts. Single-party consent is all that's required, she'd explained. Just keep your phone in your pocket recording and you'll be covered. David had offered to wait nearby in case I needed support afterward. I'll be at that coffee shop 2 blocks away, he'd said, kissing me goodbye that morning. Just call if you need me. I arrived exactly at 2 p.m., parking behind Tyler's SUV. Sam was just getting out of his car as I pulled up, his expression grim but determined. We didn't speak as we walked to the front door, but he gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. The house looked different somehow, less imposing than it had my entire life. Perhaps because I no longer saw it as the fortress of authority it had once been, but simply as a house that my parents couldn't afford, maintained at the expense of honesty and familial trust. My mother opened the door before we could knock, her face a careful mask of neutrality. "Come in," she said, her voice subdued. "Everyone's in the living room." We followed her inside to find my father sitting stiffly in his armchair while Richard Carter occupied one end of the sofa. There was also an unfamiliar woman in a navy suit sitting in the dining chair that had been brought in. "This is Diane Ferris," my father said, gesturing to the woman. "She's our new attorney." My heart sank a little at the word attorney. So they were fighting back after all. "Please sit down," my mother urged, indicating the remaining seats. "We have a lot to discuss." Tyler, Sam, and I sat together on the sofa beside Richard, presenting a united front. Richard nodded at me with a slight smile that I found oddly comforting. "I've asked you here today," my father began, his voice formal and strained, "because recent events have made it clear that certain family matters need to be addressed openly." My mother twisted her hands in her lap, the diamond bracelet Sam had noticed glinting in the lamplight. I noticed she'd removed her wedding ring. Strange for a woman who never took it off, even when gardening or cooking. "As Natalie has discovered," my father continued, "there were irregularities in the distribution of your grandmother's estate. These irregularities were my responsibility as executor, and I acknowledge that they were not in keeping with the explicit terms of the will." I blinked in surprise. This was as close to an admission of guilt as I'd ever heard from him. "To remedy this situation, your mother and I have listed the house for sale. We've already received an offer above asking price, with closing scheduled for March 1st. From those proceeds, Natalie will receive her full inheritance plus appropriate interest." He nodded toward Ms. Ferris, who opened her briefcase and removed several documents. "We've drawn up a formal agreement to this effect," she said, passing copies to each of us. "It details the amounts owed, the source of the funds, and the timeline for repayment. It also includes a confidentiality clause regarding the original misallocation of assets." I took the document but didn't look at it yet. "Why the confidentiality clause?" I asked. "To protect the family reputation," my mother said quickly. "There's no need for the entire community to know our private business." I looked at Richard, who gave an almost imperceptible shrug, indicating this was standard practice. "There's more," my father said, clearing his throat uncomfortably. "The house sale will generate more than enough to cover Natalie's inheritance, the diverted mortgage payment, and our moving expenses. The remainder will be divided equally among the 3 of you." This was unexpected. Why? I asked bluntly. My father and mother exchanged glances. It was my mother who finally spoke. Because we've realized we can't take it with us, she said softly. And because there's something else you all need to know. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. Tyler leaned forward. What's going on, Mom? My father stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to us. I've been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. The memory issues, the financial mistakes, the increasingly poor decisions. They weren't just stress or aging. A heavy silence filled the room. My mother continued where he'd left off. We got the diagnosis 3 months ago. The doctor says progression can be slowed with medication and lifestyle changes, but... She trailed off, the implication clear. I felt a complex wave of emotions, shock, sympathy, confusion, and then a flicker of suspicion. Is that why you diverted the mortgage payment? I asked. For medical expenses? My father turned back to face us. No, that was inexcusable, regardless of my condition. The diagnosis explains some things but doesn't excuse everything. Richard spoke for the first time. James came to see me last week. He asked me to help facilitate this meeting and to share some additional information with all of you. He retrieved a folder from his briefcase. Your father has created a comprehensive estate plan, including medical directives, power of attorney designations, and financial management structures. He's requested that all 3 of you be involved in these arrangements, with specific roles, based on your individual strengths. In other words, my father said, I'm putting my affairs in order while I still can, and I want to do it right this time. He returned to his seat, suddenly looking older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen. Natalie, I owe you an apology, not just for the inheritance or the mortgage money, but for years of unequal treatment. I stared at him, unable to process this sudden shift. Was this genuine remorse or another manipulation? Your grandmother saw it, he continued. She saw how I favored your brothers, how I put more demands on you while giving you less support. She tried to talk to me about it, but I wouldn't listen. Why? I asked the question that had haunted me my entire life. Why treat me differently? My father looked down at his hands. Because you reminded me of myself, the responsible one, the planner, the cautious one. My father treated me the same way, expecting more, giving less, taking my reliability for granted. I promised myself I'd never do that to my children, and then I went and repeated the exact same pattern. The room fell silent again. Tyler reached over and squeezed my hand. We're not asking for forgiveness, my mother said after a moment. Just an opportunity to try to make things right before... She didn't finish the sentence. I looked at the agreement in my hands, then at my father's diminished form, then at my brother's solemn faces. The lawsuit suddenly seemed less important than it had a week ago. Not because the money wasn't rightfully mine, but because the victory no longer held the same meaning. I need time to think, I said finally, and to review this agreement with my attorney. Of course, my father nodded. We understand. As the meeting wrapped up, Richard asked to speak with me privately. We stepped into the kitchen, away from the others. Your father came to me voluntarily, he said in a low voice. No, legal pressure, no threats. He said he wanted to clean his conscience while he still remembers everything he needs to make right. Do you believe him? I asked. About the diagnosis? Richard nodded solemnly. I've seen the medical reports. It's real, Natalie. And based on family history, it's likely to progress faster than average. I absorbed this information, still processing its implications. Thank you for telling me. When I returned to the living room, my brothers were deep in conversation with Ms. Ferris about the details of the agreement. My parents stood slightly apart, looking lost in their own home. I'll review this and get back to you, I told them, holding up the agreement. But regardless of what happens with this, I think it's time for some honesty in this family. My mother nodded, tears in her eyes. It's long overdue. The January sky was already darkening as I left my parents' house, the weight of the revelations pressing on my chest. David was waiting at the coffee shop as promised, a steaming mug in front of him and another waiting for me. "How did it go?" he asked as I slid into the booth across from him. I stared into the coffee, trying to organize my thoughts. "My father has Alzheimer's," I said finally. "Early stages, but it's there." David's expression shifted from concern to surprise. "That's not what I expected. Are they sure?" Richard saw the medical reports. It explains some things, but not everything. I pulled out the agreement and placed it on the table. "They're selling the house. I'll get my full inheritance plus interest once the sale goes through." David reached across the table and took my hand. "How do you feel about all this?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. How did I feel? Vindicated, certainly. Sad, unexpectedly. Confused about how this diagnosis fit into the larger pattern of my family's dysfunction. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me thinks this diagnosis is just another manipulation, a way to generate sympathy and avoid real accountability. And the other part? The other part remembers that my grandfather, my father's father, had dementia too. How he changed. In the years before his diagnosis, becoming more erratic, more paranoid about money. Sound familiar? You think your father's behavior these past few years might have been early symptoms?" I shrugged. "Maybe some of it. But that doesn't explain decades of favoritism, or the deliberate theft of my inheritance 7 years ago." David nodded thoughtfully. "So where does this leave you in the lawsuit?" "If they follow through with the agreement, there won't be any need for a lawsuit. I'll get what I'm owed. But it feels too neat. Like they're trying to resolve the financial part so they don't have to address the emotional part." I sipped my coffee, finding comfort in its warmth. My father actually apologized, sort of, for how he treated me growing up. Said I reminded him of himself and that his father had treated him the same way. Do you believe him? I thought about the vulnerability I'd seen in my father's face. So unfamiliar it had been almost startling. I think I do. But that doesn't undo years of damage. No, David agreed softly. It doesn't. The next day, I took the agreement to Jennifer Mack, who reviewed it with a critical eye. "This is actually quite fair," she said, sounding mildly surprised. "The interest calculation is generous, the timeline is reasonable, and there are sufficient penalties built in if they fail to transfer the funds after the house sale." "What about the confidentiality clause?" I asked. "Is that standard?" "Yes, especially in family settlements. It prevents either party from discussing the details publicly." She glanced up at me. "Does that bother you?" I considered the question. I'm not looking to shame them publicly. I just wanted what was rightfully mine. "Then I'd recommend signing. This achieves your financial goals without the emotional toll of litigation." I signed the agreement that afternoon and had it sent to my parents' house. My mother called an hour later. "Thank you, Natalie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know this doesn't fix everything between us, but it's a start." "Yes," I agreed neutrally. "A start. Your father would like to talk to you sometime, when you're ready, about the care decisions that will need to be made eventually." "I'll think about it," I promised, not yet ready to commit to anything more. The next few weeks passed in a blur of everyday routines interspersed with updates from my parents about the house sale. True to their word, they'd accepted an offer well above asking price, and the closing was proceeding smoothly toward the March 1st date. One evening in mid-February, I received an unexpected call from Sam. "Hey, Nat," he said, sounding hesitant. "Do you have a minute? There's something I think you should know." "What's going on?" I asked, immediately concerned by his tone. I was helping Mom pack some things at the house today, and I found something strange in Dad's office. Strange how? Old bank statements, going back years, and letters from Grandma to Dad that I don't think he ever showed anyone. Sam paused. I think you should see them. Can I bring them over? An hour later, Sam was spreading documents across my dining table. Bank statements from accounts I'd never known existed, letters written in my grandmother's familiar handwriting, and most disturbingly, copies of the original checks issued to Tyler and Sam from the estate, both for exactly $160,000. She didn't just steal from you, Sam said quietly. She lied to Dad, too. I stared at the evidence before me, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. Mom? Not Dad? Sam nodded grimly. Look at these letters. Grandma wrote to Dad repeatedly, emphasizing that the inheritance was to be divided equally. And here, he pointed to a bank statement from 8 years ago, is where the money first came in. 3 equal checks, just like Grandma wanted. But I only received $12,000 because Mom intercepted your check. Look at this deposit slip. She deposited it into an account in her name alone, then transferred just $12,000 to you. The betrayal cut even deeper than I'd imagined. Not just my father, but my mother, perhaps even more so, had deliberately stolen my inheritance? Does Dad know? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't think so. From these letters, it looks like he thought everything was handled properly. Mom managed all the financial stuff, remember? She always said Dad wasn't good with money, I remembered. My mother had always controlled the family finances, managing the bills, the accounts, the investments. My father had earned the money, but she had decided where it went. There's more, Sam said, pulling out another sheaf of papers. I found these in a locked file cabinet in the basement. They're receipts, Natalie, for jewelry. Lots of it, over many years. Far more than those few pieces you were told were Grandma's collection. I thought of the diamond bracelet my mother had been wearing at our last meeting. She spent my inheritance on jewelry? And other things, Sam continued. Luxury vacations, she told Dad, were won in contests or purchased with loyalty points. Designer, clothes, even cosmetic procedures. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. The agreement has been signed. They're selling the house. Sam looked uncomfortable. Because I'm not sure Mom's being honest about Dad's condition. I think she's using his diagnosis to cover for her actions. You think she's lying about his Alzheimer's? No, I think that's real. But I think she's exaggerating how much it affected his past decisions. These letters from Grandma to Dad are all marked opened, but not responded to. Dad never answered them because Mom intercepted them. I sat back, processing this new information. So Mom saw Grandma's letters questioning whether I'd received my full inheritance, and she hid them from Dad. Exactly. And now she's letting everyone believe Dad made all these financial decisions, when it seems like she was the one behind most of it. The implications were staggering. All these years, I'd believed my father was the primary architect of my exclusion, the one who valued my brothers over me. But these documents suggested something more complex. A mother who had systematically diverted resources from me to herself, while allowing my father to take the blame. What do we do with this? I asked finally. Sam looked troubled. I don't know. The agreement you signed covers the financial part, but it feels wrong to let Mom use Dad's illness as a shield for her actions. I reached for my phone. I'm calling Tyler. We need to figure this out together. As I dialed, I realized this revelation changed everything. Not just about the inheritance, but about my understanding of family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. The truth, it seemed, was more complicated and painful than I had imagined. Tyler arrived within an hour, his face grim as Sam walked him through the evidence we'd discovered. He examined each document carefully, pausing longest on the bank, statements showing our mother's deception. "This explains so much," he said finally, sitting back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "Remember when I wanted to start my landscaping business 5 years ago? Dad seemed supportive, but Mom convinced him it was too risky. Meanwhile, she was buying jewelry with money that wasn't even hers. And it explains why she always positioned herself between Dad and me," I added, making sure any financial discussions went through her, reinforcing the narrative that I was being unreasonable whenever I questioned anything. Sam nodded solemnly. "The question is, what do we do now? The house is being sold. Natalie's getting her inheritance. Does bringing this up just create more pain for everyone?" "Dad deserves to know," Tyler said firmly. "He's taken responsibility for decisions he apparently didn't even make. And with his condition—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Soon our father might not remember enough to understand what had happened. We debated our options late into the night. Confronting our mother directly seemed unlikely to yield the truth. Taking the evidence to our father risked devastating him at an already vulnerable time. Keeping silent felt like enabling decades of deception. "There's another factor to consider," I said reluctantly. "If Mom has been this dishonest about the inheritance, what else might she be doing? With Dad's condition deteriorating, she'll have increasing control over his care and their finances." The thought hung heavy in the air. Our father's diagnosis had changed the family dynamic in ways we were only beginning to understand. "I think we need to talk to Richard," Tyler suggested. "He knows the legal implications, and Dad trusts him." Next morning, I called Richard and arranged to meet him at his office. The three of us brought the documents Sam had found, laying them out on Richard's desk, just as we had on my dining table the night before. Richard examined them methodically, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "This certainly presents a different picture than what your parents shared with me," he said finally. "We're concerned about Dad's vulnerability," I explained. "With his condition, he's going to be increasingly dependent on Mom, and these documents suggest she can't be trusted with financial matters." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "The timing is particularly concerning. Your father came to me about making things right with your inheritance shortly after his diagnosis. It suggests he genuinely wanted to correct what he believed were his mistakes before his condition progressed." "But they weren't his mistakes," Tyler pointed out. "They were Mom's deliberate actions, which she's now allowing him to take responsibility for," Sam added. Richard steepled his fingers, considering the situation. "The legal agreement you've signed, Natalie, ensures you'll receive your inheritance plus interest. That part is secure, but these documents raise questions about the future management of your father's affairs." "What options do we have?" I asked. "Your father has executed powers of attorney for both healthcare and financial matters," Richard said. "Currently, your mother is the primary agent for both. But given this new information, we might want to suggest some modifications." "Like what?" Tyler asked. "Like making it a joint power of attorney, requiring 2 signatures for major financial decisions. Or creating a trust with professional oversight." Richard looked at each of us in turn. "But first, I think your father needs to know the truth." Agreed that Richard would arrange a private meeting with our father to share what we'd discovered. The goal wasn't to punish our mother, but to protect our father and ensure transparency moving forward. 2 days later, Richard called to let me know the meeting had taken place. "Your father was understandably shaken," he reported, "but he was also grateful for the truth. He's requested a family meeting this weekend, all of you, including your mother, at my office." That Saturday, we gathered in Richard's conference room, the tension palpable. Our mother arrived last, her face tightening when she saw all 3 of us already seated with Dad and Richard. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice artificially bright. "I thought we'd settled everything with the agreement." "Margaret," my father said, his voice steadier than I'd heard it in months. "The children found some documents at the house. Documents that tell a very different story about Natalie's inheritance. The color drained from my mother's face. What? Documents? What are you talking about? Sam silently placed the stack of evidence on the table. The bank statements, the deposit slips, Grandma's intercepted letters, the jewelry receipts. Our mother stared at them, then at each of us, like a cornered animal. You had no right to go through my private things, she said finally, her voice trembling. They weren't private, Mom, Tyler replied. They were evidence of theft. You stole Natalie's inheritance and let Dad take the blame. You don't understand, she protested. Your father was making terrible financial decisions. I was protecting this family. By buying diamond bracelets? I asked quietly. By taking vacations while telling us you could barely afford groceries? You always had enough, she snapped, her composure cracking. You had your big salary, your perfect job. You didn't need the inheritance like the rest of us did. That wasn't your decision to make, my father said, his disappointment evident. Eleanor wanted her grandchildren treated equally. You deliberately went against her wishes, and then hid it from me. You are your great-grandmother's heir in more ways than one, my father agreed. And I am so proud of you, Natalie, for standing up for yourself, for refusing to accept the roles we tried to force you into, for having the courage to demand what was rightfully yours. We talked for hours that day, filling in gaps in family history, acknowledging hurts, discovering connections I'd never known existed. For the first time, I saw my father not as an authority figure or an adversary, but as a flawed, complicated human being trying to make amends while he still could. As we prepared to leave, he took my hand once more. I can't change the past, Natalie. I can't give you back the years of support and acknowledgement you deserved. But I can try to make things right going forward, for however long I have left. I know, Dad, I said, squeezing his hand. That's what we're all trying to do. In the months that followed, our family entered a new phase, messy, painful, but ultimately more honest than anything we'd known before. My mother initially raged against the new arrangements, threatening legal action, attempting to turn my brothers against me once more. When those efforts failed, she retreated into a bitter silence, accepting the stipend but refusing to engage with any of us. The house sold in March as planned. I received my full inheritance plus interest, finally, closing that chapter of the story. My brothers and I each received an additional sum from my father's estate distribution, though I chose to place mine in a trust for future needs. My father's condition progressed more rapidly than we'd hoped. By summer, he had good days and bad. Moments of startling clarity interspersed with periods of confusion. I visited him regularly, sometimes bringing David, sometimes going alone. We established new rituals, new ways of connecting that didn't depend on perfect memory or complicated history. One warm evening in August, as we sat on the porch of his new apartment watching the sunset, he turned to me with unusual lucidity. Was I a good father to you, Natalie? He asked, his voice vulnerable in a way that still surprised me. I considered my answer carefully. You weren't perfect, I said finally, but you tried to make things right when it mattered most. That counts for something. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with this assessment. And are you happy now? I thought about the past months, the healing conversations with my brothers, the growing closeness with David, the sense of peace that had gradually replaced my anger. I am, I said, realizing it was true. Not because of the money, but because of the truth. Because I finally stood up for myself and discovered I was stronger than I knew. He smiled, reaching for my hand. Your great-grandmother would be proud. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I felt the weight of the locket against my chest where I now wore it daily. A reminder of the woman who had demanded truth and justice a century ago, of the grandmother, who had seen that same spirit in me, of the father who had finally acknowledged it. The money that had started this journey was just one kind of inheritance. The more valuable legacy I was discovering was the courage to break destructive patterns, to demand truth, and to forge new connections based on honesty rather than obligation. My family would never be perfect. Some wounds would never completely heal. But in standing up for myself that Christmas, in making the call that changed all our lives, I had claimed something more valuable than any inheritance: my own voice, my own worth, and the freedom to define family on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.